CUUATS wasn't much more than a record-keeping organization and a compiler of other people's thoughts in terms of reports. Even the long-range transportation plans that were created at that point in time were pretty basic. We took the road classification system that was done by the cities and printed it. We took the list of projects compiled by the cities and printed it. We took the priorities that were done by the cities and printed it.
I came in '78, and early on, as I was trying to recall that, it seems to me in those early years, we were doing pretty much what you described as having been done previously, which was identify priorities for projects. And the technical committee, I'm sure, was doing a lot of work in the background. And I think that the planning operation then really got going sometime after that.
I mean, with everybody involved, you're talking about people from so many different transportation agencies coming together. It was always a good experience the whole time. That's what I really remember about it. It was a good experience, and everybody then getting to the same page about where we are, you know, what the needs are, where we're headed, how much it's going to cost and take to get there.
I started in my position as managing director of the transit district in 1974. I know the CUUATS records go back to '82, and I was there in '82, but I think I preceded that. But you know, that was before the beginning of time, and so, or at least the beginning, before the beginning of recorded time.
I remember I was a young planner, long hair and the whole 9 yards, and I went to this meeting that was a bunch of engineers, including the county highway superintendent who chaired the meeting. And I went shortly after one of the reworks of the federal transportation law. And it was the first time that MPOs were required to take a multimodal approach to their planning. And up until that point in time, CUUATS had been not much more than the body that allocated federal aid for highways. So when I went to the meeting and asked them to talk about bicycles and transit, I could have been killed if the daggers coming out of the eyes had been real. It was pretty interesting. So the upshot of that was one paragraph in the plan about bicycles, 2 or 3 sentences saying they existed and they were a form of transportation.
I had the pleasure of working for many years with Jim Trail at the University of Illinois, and he was the technical committee representative. And Jim, you know, is certainly a friend and a great professional for many years. And what I recall at every technical committee meeting when it came down to the various committee reports was we had a committee that's no longer in existence called CUTEC, the Champaign-Urbana Traffic Engineering Committee, and just like clockwork, Jim would give his report, but it always took a 5-minute introduction to the committee, which largely were the same members of CUTEC, or many of them were, to explain the purpose and function and role for CUTEC to the very people that were members of the committee of CUTEC. So we had to endure that all the time. I think by my 5th exposure to his explanation, I think I had it memorized by then. But Jim meant well. He's a great guy, but his repetitive nature of the explanation for CUTEC brings a smile or a chuckle to my face.
I was the CUUATS secretary. I started here at the Regional Planning Commission in October of 1994, and I worked for CUUATS until 1999 sometime when I transferred to Head Start.
One of the most enjoyable, I think, was working with Frank Rentschler. Frank was representing Savoy and CUUATS in different capacities. You had parliamentary procedure, you had Robert's Rules of Order, and then you had Frank's Rules of Order. And I enjoyed Frank's Rules of Order more than anything, I think. He kept the meetings going. I think Rita and Susan kind of had to keep him in line, but he seconded his own motions a few times and voted for the county board chairman at least once, and me maybe 2 or 3 times. I don't know. Frank was a good guy. He really was.
I suppose the most significant project I remember with CUUATS was the planning and development of the Windsor Road thoroughfare. Early on, that before Windsor Road was developed as it is today, it was a two-lane road from Lincoln Avenue to Race, and west of Lincoln Avenue was just a farm road, was nothing at all.
I remember the corridor studies mostly, Illinois 130, Curtis Road, US 45, just trying to get those planning processes to work with the residents, and how there was some very controversial moments during those processes, especially Illinois 130. So I remember having a boundary on a map, just a little line that I put in some color saying what something signified, and everyone took it that we wanted to put a new road in because there was that line on the map. And it was just an existing conditions map from the very beginning, but it was the start of a whole process of always being questioned and learning a lot pretty quickly about how careful you have to be when you're transmitting information and talking with people.
One that I thought was sort of unique is the ongoing attempt to have an arterial development that would tie in with an interchange on I-57. You may or may not know about how that developed. At one time, it was Kirby, Florida that was going to be an interchange. There was a lot of local input and resistance to that idea. So it moved a mile south to Windsor Road. Still, there was some resistance.
I think with the new interchange that we had, Curtis Road, Dale Finney was telling me that he'd worked on that way back, maybe even before I came to work at the county. And how long from that time until it was actually constructed was a long time span. Which is why, people don't realize, which is why you have planning, because you can't decide one day, hey, we need an interchange there, and build it the next day.
It actually started even before I started with the state, which is a long time ago. About 1974 is when it started. I started the state in 1980. It was a part of a larger plan for interchanges along the interstate corridor for Champaign, Urbana. I believe, if I recall correctly, there were 7 that were studied at that time. Curtis Road was one of them. A few of them were built, some of the ones that you see out there now, others have not been. But it was a bit of an education to revisit what had been studied in 74, 75, and update it to the current needs, the current traffic patterns, and try to get everybody back on board with the interchange idea, the concept, and the location.
I'd been here for maybe 5 years and realized how important Curtis Road was going to be to not only the village, but the university, the city of Champaign, city of Urbana, the entire area, and what that would mean. And it was a fun project to be involved with in a lot of different ways, but it was also somewhat frustrating. The project actually started, more than 40 years ago, as we talk today, more than 40 years ago. And it's hard to understand how can something so good for an area take so long to come to fruition. And you quickly learn that there are other projects in the immediate area that are just as important, or maybe even more important at the time, and you have to wait your turn.
New people coming to the community are always amazed at the substantial number of governmental units that we have, and that in itself can be challenging, but I think that CUUATS is a great example of a lot of varied governmental units with different goals working together. I don't recall, other than maybe some discussions on funding, any major rows that people had, and for the most part, everybody has worked together. Everybody respects the other jurisdictions' goals and what they're trying to do.
The Olympian Drive project, early on in the discussion leading up to that, A lot of difficulties amongst the members, trying to get our arms wrapped around the enormity of what that project is or was, and what it continues to mean to the community as we move in to this next phase of trying to get that road finished and get the bridge that will connect everything in the proper way done.
I do recall having a private meeting with the folks that were opposed to Olympian Drive and their representative. And that meeting was a very critical meeting, and they lost their temper at one part of the meeting, and I lost my temper as part of the meeting. And I will never forget that Bill Gray remained cool as a cucumber through the entire process. And it was good because I was able to ruffle their feathers. They were ruffled mine for sure. And we got into it, and then Bill was able to come in the voice of reason.
We were setting down traffic counters out there, and back before we had interns to help us. And I fell down a ditch and hurt my ankle. Felt like I was going to pass out. It was a hot day. And so I climbed up out of the ditch, and when I told you that I was not feeling well, you said, "You're pregnant." And a few weeks later, sure enough, Rita had called it, I was pregnant. So that's my funny CUUATS story.
Sometimes we worked late. It was after dark one evening. We were finishing up, and I was leaving the project, and I got stopped by the U of I police. "What are you doing out here?" Building the road. I'm building a road. So after a little while, they figured it out. They'd let me go.
We're now probably the #1 MPO in the United States for a community of our size. Multiple awards, and that is in no small part due to the professionalism that Rita brought to the job.
I think we're moving in the right direction, and this community has a better direction and a better understanding of itself than others.
And looking at the bicycle and pedestrian opportunities, and I think that's been particularly strong in Champaign, Urbana, building bike paths into a lot of the streets. Again, like some of the bigger projects, until you get continuity, it's probably not going to be utilized as much on a block-by-block basis, but if you don't put it in the first block, then all of a sudden that's an obstacle for the next block. So
I work with about half of the MPOs in the state of Illinois, and probably the most memorable part of working with CUUATS is just the caliber of the staff, the high level of the staff, education, involvement, and the willingness to do new things. I know CUUATS is known nationally as being a leader as an MPO.
Credit to CUUATS. We've been a leader in many ways in setting the standard for how other MPOs should provide services and direction to help local agencies in their planning.
Who's your favorite colleague?
Bill Gray.
Oh yeah? From that group?
Yeah, I know, I saw him out there. Yeah, he told me to say that, no.
I'm impressed. I'm impressed with CUUATS, really. I mean, when it was just you and me back in 2000, things were hard and we didn't have as much as that we had to do, but there's like an empire here now since I've left, many more employees, many more projects, a lot more credibility within the community, and I just think it's become something pretty awesome.
I think I've already told you more than I remember about CUUATS.